everyone. Welcome to PolitiFest 2020. I'm Adriana Heldes, and let me turn my light on so you can see me better. I'm a multimedia producer with Voice of San Diego. In case you're not familiar with us, Voice of San Diego is a nonprofit investigative news organization committed to holding public officials accountable and giving you, the public, the tools you need to be advocates for the public good. As a nonprofit, we depend on members and donors like yourself to make our work possible. So thank you so much for supporting us. We'd like to take a quick moment just to recognize our sponsors. First, we have the Google News Initiative for supporting the creation of this virtual event. The College Arts and Sciences at USD for underwriting all student tickets. They paid for all of our free student tickets. The San Diego Foundation for supporting our community conversations like this one. And also thank you to Cox Communications, SDG&E, the Atlantis Group, the City of San Diego Retired Employees Association, City Heights Community Development Corporation, the San Diego County Democratic Party, and Business for Good. PolitiFest runs through noon, Saturday, October 3rd. And the full schedule is available at politifest.org, and you can check out the sessions available. A lot of our sessions are free throughout the event, as well as some will be available in both Spanish and in English. Recordings of all the sessions will be available on our website by noon the next day. And you can also use the online event guide at CVent to connect with other attendees to learn about some of the speakers and sponsors. And make sure you get your own VOSD mug and drinking glass, kind of looks like this. I'll put the link in the chat in just a little bit. And if you have any questions, please make sure to use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and then we'll try to get through those as quickly as we can. So yeah, thank you. I'll have Maddie take it away. If you wanna.
Thanks, Adriana, and welcome everyone. Before we begin, I ask that all panelists and attendees join me in acknowledging that we are webcasting on stolen Kumeyaay land and effects resulting from the forced relocation and genocide of the Kumeyaay by colonizers and government entities. As we discuss the challenges and opportunities of re-envisioning a just San Diego region, it is imperative to recognize and support Indigenous activists and their continual efforts to reclaim their ancestral land rights. For 600 generations, the Kumeyaay have nurtured a relationship with the land and its environment, fostering the sort of economic, social, and environmental equity we on the panel envision for San Diego. I invite you to take a moment and reflect on how you may leave this panel tonight and join the Kumeyaay in their righteous efforts to create a just recovery for all San Diegans. Thank you. My name is Madeleine McMurray, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel on a just recovery from COVID-19 in the San Diego region. Joining us this evening is Dr. Kyra Green from the Center on Policy Initiatives, Carolina Martinez from the Environmental Health Coalition, Rachel Hamilton from San Diego 350, Sonja Robinson from the NAACP San Diego branch, and Dr. Darwin Fishman, a lecturer at UCSD in San Diego State and co-founder of the Racial Justice Coalition. Now that we've met all of our panelists, Rachel, I'd like to ask you our first question. What connections to and collaborations with local activist efforts outside of San Diego 350 are you currently contributing to and engaging in?
Yes, thank you, Maddie, for asking that question. First, I just wanted to say hello to everyone, and thank you for having me here today. So outside of my work as the Justice and Equity intern with San Diego 350, I am currently the founder of SEAL, which stands for Community Environmental Justice, Academia, Abolition, and Liberation, which is a BIPOC women-led, Women with an X-led organization that is here to help the Black femme community in San Diego. Right now, we've been doing a lot of work that's been focusing on COVID relief. So we've been providing rent relief and food justice initiatives where we're giving meals to families of single mothers and other things along that caliber. So with that work, we're really trying to be a resource for the Black women community with San Diego at the moment. So we just want to pick up our part and just do that part in helping that community as a whole.
Carolina, thank you so much. Or Rachel, thank you so much. Carolina, would you like to go ahead and share the connections to and collaborations with local activist efforts you're involved in?
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation as well. We're excited to be here virtually. We have a lot of collaborations. We've been working in the region for 40 years now. We're your local environmental justice organization. But I want to be specific about an effort that we're working with a lot of the organizations that we have here today, with San Diego 350, with CPI, with Mid-City CAN, City High CDC. We have been working in an initiative to ensure that we have a different mass public transit system, because 70% of the jobs in our region are not connected via mass public transit. That means that we don't have economic opportunities via the mass public transit system. Our transit dependent communities can rely on the system. And so we've been working to influence the projects that were envisioned through the MTS ballot measure that was going to be taken to the ballot in November, but it's no longer being taken to the ballot this November. But we're now very invested in the regional transportation plan that is in the works. And the reason why this is so important is because about 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the region come from transportation. So if we really want to address climate in our region, then we need a mass public transit system. And we know that if we want to really recover from COVID, then we need to connect our people to jobs, and it needs to be frequent. So for example, I work in National City and I live in the city of San Diego. It takes me 10 minutes to get to work if I drive by myself. It would take me an hour at least if I would use transit. It's not dependable, and we need a dependable transit system. And yes, it is in the works, and we're trying to influence that very heavily right now, but we can't wait 20 years. We can't wait 15 years. We can't wait 10 years. We can't wait 5 years. We need this to happen tomorrow. So one of the things that we're working on right now is how could we see more buses, frequent buses. Yes, we need the heavy infrastructure improvement projects, the trolleys, we need all of that, but that's gonna take 10, 15 years. We can't wait another pandemic, more heat waves, and more fires before this thing changes. We need changes in the next 2 years. So we're proposing that we see a heavy amount of buses in our region so that I could just hop on the bus and get to work. So yeah, let me stop right there.
Thank you. And like you said, that kind of work is just really, really important and requires a lot of policy initiatives. And so Kyra, Carolina had mentioned partnerships. Would you like to share what kind of local activist efforts you're involved in, and then the tie that the Environmental Health Coalition has with CPI?
Absolutely. First of all, it's good to see you all this evening, and I'm so glad to be here having this discussion. The work that we do at the Center on Policy Initiatives, there's not a lot of time to separate my personal life from the work that we do as an organization, and that work is deeply rooted in collaborative work. So for instance, we anchor to budget-related coalitions, the Invest in San Diego Families Coalition that focuses on the county budget and including community voice to make sure that it's a people's budget. We do the same work at the city through the Community Budget Alliance. In both of those places, it's about making sure that the way government operates reflects the desires of everyday people, and often we're closed off from those systems. Another collaboration that's really important to us is the work we do as part of Engage San Diego. That work is about getting voters engaged, and often for us, it's about focusing on local politics, because all too often, people have either already made up their mind, and more disappointingly, they've decided to tune out from national politics because they don't feel like there's an opportunity to really have a voice and make a difference. And so we're doing a lot of work there to help bring a focus on local politics as a way to motivate people, at least at CPI, to come out and vote this November. So that's important to us. Another effort I want to speak to is the work that we do. We are the fiscal sponsors of an effort, because we don't generally do that, but it's important to us to provide structures for people to do important work. And that's the We All We Got mutual aid group that is doing critical work that really got motivated and moved very quickly, more rapidly than traditional structures in response to COVID. And it's thinking about how we, COVID was part of it, but recognizing that this is an ongoing struggle. And absolutely the work that we do in all these parts is about housing, it's about transportation, but it is always deeply rooted in a focus on economic justice and respect for working people. I think one of the things that I love about this panel tonight is just the importance of centering people as workers. We get discouraged from thinking about and talking about ourselves as people who provide labor in the world. Somehow that's something to be disrespected as being someone who just works hard and supports their family. And the heart of the work that we do at CPI is returning respect for working people. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And Sonja, I saw you clapping at a mention. So if you'd like to go ahead and go next and let us know what you've been involved in the past year or so.
Thank you so much for having me. It is definitely an honor to be on this panel and to be included in this discussion. So thank you, Maddie, as well as Voice of San Diego, for this panel with PolitiFest this year. So I was clapping because I'm excited and familiar with we got that Dr. Kyra Green mentioned. So that definitely excited me. So a lot of the work we're doing from a committee perspective with the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee, as I chair for the San Diego branch of the NAACP, as well as the North San Diego County branch of the NAACP, includes a lot of focus on energy democracy. A lot of us don't have a lot of luxury necessarily with your everydays to even think about energy democracy. And so I've been collaborating with a group of people that I consider my climate avengers that is working to try to help whether it's our utility rates, avoiding minimum bids, looking at different options, working or trying to work in collaboration with our city council for our city's utility franchise agreement and many others. So a lot of my collaborative efforts is in partnership with a coalition. So our Environmental and Climate Justice Committee have joined many different coalitions over the course of a year and a half that we've existed within the San Diego branch that has been existing for 101 years. So, and we are going on like 18 months. And so in the work we've been doing, such as getting our elected officials to write a letter to our California's Public Utilities Commission to oppose a minimum bid that was proposed by our investor-owned utilities, SDG&E, of a minimum of $38. And we were successful in getting that minimum bid opposed or rejected. So when it went to hearing the beginning of this year, that proposal was denied. And that we saw, or definitely I did, as an economic as well as social and racial justice issue, that many people that may not even generate $38 worth of utilities, that may live in a studio or one-bedroom apartment, would be charged a horrific amount of increase on their bills. So we work with San Diego 350, Climate Action Campaign, many others. San Diego Green New Deal is another coalition group. Public Power San Diego is another coalition group, as well as many others. So we also are working with our Better Franchise coalition to see that we get realized justice within the city's utilities franchise agreement as well. So I'll go ahead and end there, but thank you.
Thank you. And for those who are attending tonight, just to bring you back on really quickly, would you mind explaining what energy democracy is?
So thank you for sharing that. So I would say energy democracy is just what our democracy stands for in itself. And you're looking at it from an energy perspective. And as I mentioned, many of us do not even think about the source of our energy, where it's coming from. You know, is it coal? Is it clean? Is it renewable? So when we're looking at energy democracy, we're looking at having options, having choices. I was brought up, my father used to always say, one choice is no choice. You should always have a choice in everything you do. And so one is looking at our democracy of having voices and the type of energy source we have. also in having options of where our energy source is coming from and actually who's providing that energy. So when we're looking at from an energy democracy lens or perspective or model, should I say, we're looking at it from a holistic view. So we want our regenerative, renewable, clean energy sources, as well as having options as the current economic system proves that competition helps drive down the cost of some of our basic needs. And so when we have options and choices to select instead of having a monopoly, then our model has shown that our ratepayers and those that pay our bill pay significantly less when you have an option to choose versus just one. So hopefully that helps with the definition of energy democracy.
It does. Thank you so much. And Darwin, moving on to you, what kinds of local activist efforts are you currently involved in outside of the Racial Justice Coalition or in collaboration with?
All right. Thank you. And I also really appreciate being invited and included in this panel. I would start with, of course, for tonight, I'm wearing the Fight for 15 shirt. And so let me acknowledge the work that CPI, Dr. Green, your cohort did on that. And that in some way encompassed not just within the work I do with Racial Justice Coalition, but a lot of the work that I do in the 4th District and south of the 8, in the sense that a lot of the policy that's developed, whether it's our area for Racial Justice Coalition and criminal justice or environmental justice issues, we're partnering with folks like Sonja and the NAACP, is based on that premise. And that's another way to also answer the question about the energy democracy, is that historically there's been a losing end, and part of our work is trying to correct for that. So our voices have a say in the decisions that are being made. With that, it's true, Racial Justice Coalition, we focus primarily on criminal justice issues, and we do it through our model of having a multiracial coalition for organizations and individuals that can participate and be a part of our public meetings. So even though our current campaign right now is directed at the district attorney, as prosecutor resign, based on her history, specifically, if not prosecuting any police officers for shootings, we also have, as part of our groups that are part of the Racial Justice Coalition, NAACP and 350.org, Indivisible, and other organizations that are working on environmental issues. So one of the coalitions that we also join and we're participating in has been for public power. And for us, that's really critical, because when we talk about that the rates are really high in San Diego for energy, that has a disproportionate impact on working class, poor folks, and minority communities. We're the ones in that sense that are really hurting by having those higher rates. And in that sense, we wouldn't want just the movement to be made up of people like north of the 8. That's really important to understand that we have just as much at stake, if not more, in this discussion, in this debate. So I do that as part of the leadership for Racial Justice Coalition, but I also personally make sure that I'm involved with these other groups and organizations too. So that does keep me very active and involved. And I think it's important because a lot of that is then relationship building and that bridge building. So we're not in our different silos, but we're working together, and that we see our commonalities in our work. And I really appreciate that. There's definitely a lot of folks in San Diego see eye to eye and are pushing for that. So it's not just in that sense a specific cause issue we're working on, but how can we find ways to work together and be more effective in addressing our issues?
Thank you. And I think what you're speaking to about creating a larger coalition to be able to tackle challenges and issues across industries is really something that all of your works have a common theme in. And so my next question for anybody who'd like to take up the answer is, it feels like many of our local politicians are open to environmental justice solutions, yet say the budget is not there to support them. So for the people that are currently involved or looking to get involved, how do you recommend that individuals respond if this is something that their elected official replies with?
I'll jump in and take this on. I mean, I think in this moment in particular, this messaging, which is endemic, like all politicians are saying around austerity, is really the most dangerous narrative that we have right now. Just to take one moment, we know from the last recession that we experienced that it was not the austerity budgeting that got us out of that. Actually, it prolonged the recession, and it particularly had negative impact on Black and Brown communities. I can talk about some of the reasons why that's true. So I think the first thing is to say you do not get a recovery from this economic condition by leaning into cuts and taking away from the things that we need. And in fact, this is exactly the moment to be investing in the kinds of solutions that we need. They pay off in the long term. And frankly, they're often cheaper in moments of economic crisis, right? It's just easier to get them moving. So I think the first thing that anyone should say is that, austerity does not work. That's not the way to move forward. And then I just want to say to Kyra's point, and also that we just don't have time to waste. These are some of the questions that we're asking, that people's lives, when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about it because people are getting sick and people are dying before their time because of these things. So there's not a time to wait. There's no economic future where this is going to get any easier. It's always the right time to do it right now.
Yes, I totally agree. And in addition to that, when we're looking at it, even from, I'll use a lens from a Green New Deal. And we have a coalition, San Diego Green New Deal. And we know historically in the 30s, when President Roosevelt proposed the Green New Deal, it dealt with relief, recovery, and reform. And so right now is an opportunity for us to see things differently than we have seen before. And understanding that environmental justice, as Dr. Kyra mentioned, is that there's many communities, Black communities, communities of color, Indigenous people that have most burden on them from an environmental justice perspective, but yet contribute the least. And so literally the #1 indicator of where toxins are located is based on race. And so as she mentioned, there are health issues, health impacts. There's the reason why, like even when we're talking about from a COVID perspective, and a lot of the scientists came out and said, well, it looks like Blacks are being impacted worse. One of the reasons and indications is because a lot of people of color have asthma. Why do they have asthma? It's because of the pollutions and the dirty air, as well as the water and things of that nature. So when you have an underlying health condition that's related to your environment, and then you have a pandemic, a virus that hits, it just compounds a condition that you already have. So the way the transportation is designed, the way, the redlining issues, I mean, we can go historically back and, on and on. There are so many implications of environmental injustice, unfortunately, to communities that contribute the least to damaging our environment. So as she mentioned, there is no time to waste. And when you are looking forward and making these advancements, I see addressing environmental justice somewhat of a remix, right? A remix to social and racial justice. Because when you address environmental justice correctly, you do directly also address the racial, social, and economic justice simultaneously. So to me, it is the perfect model. I mean, we have our traditional social and racial justice movements, which I support and believe in. And I also believe addressing environmental justice is a remix that also addresses all of those too. And so our communities need it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I like the budget question. And one way I'd say is easy to talk about it is in terms of priorities. City of San Diego, let's look at them. Let's talk about 101 Ash Street. Let's talk about the Hang Gliding Center. Let's talk about when San Diego Chargers suddenly find a whole lot of money. It's really, I mean, it really is that simple about the priorities, and it's extraordinary the way that the city council, the mayor have spent money. And then yet it's true when we come to things like talking about energy solutions, suddenly there's not money. So I think, again, following what Sonja said, it's just really putting the pressure on them so in that sense they make the right decisions. And that also, again, it's a lot of these unserved communities and marginalized communities that end up getting hurt the most by these decisions and neglected the most. So then we can also go the other way and talk about, well, what does the pollution look like in places like Barrio Logan? Why is it so bad? Why don't they have, in that sense, in terms of public policy, developed for them that's the most healthy for things like their children? So I think that that would be the way I would frame it and approach that question.
Thank you. And so,
If
Sonja,
no one else want to mention anything, I just want to add one more thing based on what Darwin said, is that our city and county budget does reflect our values. So if they're not willing to invest in addressing environmental justice, you know, we have to find someone to put in office that does align with our values, which is our lives.
Oh, absolutely. I entirely agree with you on that point and all of the others that you and Darwin and Kyra have made thus far. Sonja, you touched on a really interesting and pertinent point about addressing environmental justice correctly leads to social and racial justice. So Rachel, with your work in San Diego 350, would you like to share a little bit about how you're working to uplift and address all three equity tenets?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Maddie. First, I'd just like to echo everyone's comments on that last question. You're all so amazing, and I'm just learning so much just sitting here right now. So I'm really thankful to be on this panel. But back to my work as the Justice and Equity intern at San Diego 350. I started this work with the organization by just kind of having the experience of being a Midwesterner and being a Gen Z that grew up in a very racist society, and just kind of having that survival instinct to kind of fight for my rights. And I was there, not there, but I was very activated during the 2016 era of Black Lives Matter, things like that. So just from that experience, I kind of have a lot of that experience as a whole, and my experience as a Black girl. I just have a lot of activism towards social and racial justice. And it's not necessarily that it was like, I felt like I needed to, but just because I had to. So when I came to San Diego 350, I was here in San Diego during my senior year, and I was just interested in the climate movement after I did the youth climate strike in 2018. And I found that there was a large gap that covered Black and Brown communities in the climate work that I was initiated into. And I felt that that was a problem. I felt like there were voices that weren't being heard, and that when we were talking about climate, it was only for a certain group, and that group did not include Black voices. And I felt like because of my experience, I could give some insight on that. So that's how I got this position as intern. And recently we've been really focusing on just starting with the basics of racial justice and understanding that a lot of the things that are happening a lot of the injustices that are happening are rooted in white supremacy. And once we understand that, and we understand anti-Blackness and how that plays into just all the injustices, like you all were mentioning, like air pollution equality and hazard waste sites, and how that's all based off of race alone, you know? Just things like that. Once we have an understanding of racial justice, then we can really, we can but work for climate activism in an intersectional way. And that way we can be the voice for all peoples and not just a specific group, because everyone's affected. We're all people of the earth. So everyone's voice should be heard in this matter.
Thank you. And so Rachel, a lot of what you're sharing and what Darwin has shared about transportation being really important, and Sonja was saying that Black Americans and people of color are predominantly affected by COVID-19 because they have asthma. A lot of that leads to transportation issues. Everybody driving in their own car creates a lot of greenhouse gases. Carolina, you mentioned earlier about the ballot measures that you and EHC put together with MTS. If you'd like to share a little bit more on those right now, and moving forward, how you think that we should reply when MTS and the county say that there's not the budget to address public transit in San Diego.
Thank you. Let me just take a step back before I land there. I do want to elevate what Sonja was mentioning, that when we create environmental justice solutions, we create solutions for everyone. And the reason why that is because the sources of greenhouse gas emissions and toxic air pollution are housed in our communities, in EJ communities. If you don't have EJ communities at the table, that means you're not providing climate solutions. It's all false. It's all makeup, right? So if that's the case, that should be the first filter for, is this really a climate solution or just a waste of money, right? The other thing that I want to elevate is that, for example, City of San Diego right now has a climate action plan that does not include a strategy in air quality. The City of San Diego also published an equity index that does not include air quality data, reliable air quality data that is used by the state. And they continue to argue that it's not reliable data. So that means that we're excluding communities north of San Isidro. That means that we're not accounting for all the air pollution that's going on in Barrio Logan for an equity index. And it means that we are focused, so that it also means that our climate solutions are focused on greenhouse gas emission reduction. So for the public who's participating in this, it's really important to understand that there's greenhouse gas emissions and toxic air pollution. And some greenhouse gas emissions are also causing toxic air pollution, but not all of it. And so what we need is solutions that overlap both of them. So all of our solutions, so what does that look like? For example, if we're advancing zero emission or electric buses, we could house them anywhere in the city and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But they wouldn't have the same impact if they would be housed in a community like Barrio Logan. Why? Because we need to reduce air quality impacts in Barrio Logan. So for the city, for MTS, for example, it was really hard to understand why we needed those electric buses in Barrio Logan first. We had to fight for it. But it was as simple as understanding that when you're creating real solutions, you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. And that's when you do justice. So the same thing applies for the climate action plan of City of San Diego. For any climate policy, if you're not reducing air quality impacts, you're just focusing on the natural environment. And that means you're not taking health into account. So you're saying that pollution doesn't have a health impact. And it does, as we know, right? Okay, so then if we transition into the budget conversation, is also addressing that. What are the priorities and how do we reframe our thinking into, we need jobs to be connected to transit. We need transit to be connected to jobs because that's actually what's going to give us recovery. If our workers are not able to get to the worker centers, the job centers, then that means that we don't have a setup for economic growth in our region, and we're missing a huge opportunity. So it's not an issue of lack of funding, because, for example, MTS just committed in 2017 $200 million for gas operated buses, for CNG buses, what we call them CNG buses. So there's money. It's just an issue of political interest, and it's really difficult to move elements towards equity when we have policymakers and staffers in place who do not represent the interests of the community. And so they are a legacy that we have that are not necessarily interested in EJ. And so it is the work that we do with the organizations that are here and with the communities that are most impacted, bringing them to the table is to articulate that story and convey the importance. Because it is very difficult for people to understand when you have asthma and the impacts that it has in your life. And so yeah, let me just pause right there.
Yeah, I think Kyra can probably speak more to the way that the budget does or does not reflect the county's, I guess, attempts or endeavors to address environmental health and racial justice. So Kyra, if you'd like to go ahead and explain.
Yes. So one thing that I often do in these spaces is talk about the fact that, we have a county that during the last recession stacked up money in reserves when people were suffering. And, I would like to believe that we're a county that's changing, but I think that change needs to be seen completely. We have not seen it, and they continue. This is one of the first, these last 2 years have been the first times we've seen them spend some of the money that they hold in reserve to meet some community needs, but certainly not at the level that we need to see it. And I think part of that is some of what I've heard from other people on this panel. I think in this moment where we think about how we make a budget, what can governments do? What's their role? I think the first thing is, it always seems relevant to me that, when we talk about EJ, sometimes I'm using it to refer to environmental justice and sometimes to economic justice. And to Sonja's point, they are connected, they are the same. And so I think, number one, we have to start with having local government, to Kyra's point, that focuses on working people. If you start with building an economy that's based on working people, that is a completely different situation. But right now, we have policymakers who act as if businesses are all that drive business interests, and corporate interests are the only thing that drive an economy. And they're right, it's driven us into the kind of economic challenges that we have. It's driven us into the environmental challenges we have when you put the interest of business and profit making above everything else, and above fairness and above justice and above, what is in the best interest of the health and well-being of the people in your country. And just to give a sense of the context that we're working in when we talk to folks, I saw a statistic today that there have been across the country 1 million people who lost work or stopped looking for work just in the month of September. And what was striking to me about that is that 80% of those people were women. So one, when we think about a recovery, an economy, how we invest, I think an economy that's not, where we're not looking at how are we investing in the things that most impact women and femme folks in our society, we already know that we're not going to, Kyra's point, we're not going to achieve economic justice, we're not going to achieve environmental justice if we don't think about the interests and needs of women and femme. What does that come down to then? What are the kinds of investments we ought to see? So part of it has to do with investments in things like connecting people to jobs, absolutely. The transportation system that connects people and the jobs that are created there, both in building out those systems, building the equipment for it, but also the service jobs that run that system are critically important ones. And there's some of the places where we've seen the most opportunity for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the economic system historically, but we've also seen governments that want to invest less and less. It's the shocking thing about government in the United States, but they're the one place that's constantly led by people who don't believe in investing in government and in our public sector. When you don't believe in investing in the public sector, you hurt women, because this has been a place where women and femme have advanced. This is a place where people of color have had opportunities in the labor market. And it's critical to connecting people to solutions, right? It's critical to that part of it, but it's also the places where we need policies that are implemented that move us forward in this arena. We know that that's not happening right now, because in that same set of data, the description was that economic recovery from the pandemic since March, 60% of white people who lost jobs at the early part of this pandemic have regained some form of employment. If you look at that same number for Black people in this country, it's less than a third, right? Why is that? Because where have we been making cuts in this economy in the midst of this? We're cutting where people are losing jobs in service sectors, where we've paid low wages, where we've asked people in this region included to commute long distances in single cars by themselves to jobs that pay barely enough to pay for their rent and their transportation that they use to get there. And yet we haven't thought through what are the places to help move folks into other jobs that really do contribute to the economy. You see people right now. I was on a panel, was in a discussion with an elected official who was absolutely talking about the return of the TOT taxes. Like, we're gonna have hotels just reopening all over the city in the immediate future, generating revenue. We've been fighting to say when that happens, people of color who've been working there should get their jobs back. People should get their jobs back there. But we also have to be honest about the fact that that economy may not return in that way. And we have to make investments in privileging those folks who've lost work in those places, in training and opportunities in the new sectors that we invest in. And I don't see anywhere where we're seriously having those types of conversations in local government, certainly not in our city of San Diego and not at the county level.
So thank you, Kyra. For you and for any other panelists, what then do you think are key industries that we should be focusing on for a just recovery?
Hi. So for me, I mean, education is primarily for, one of our industries. Of course, I'm going to say our energy, right? I think that's another, it actually employs a significant amount of people, and there's opportunities for even more done a different way. I also believe that housing and the construction of housing, but I think the question about that is how it's done is really what matters, right? Not just housing, but the full infrastructure and structure and how it's done, the purpose behind it, and what's driving it, what should be driving it is, I think, more so the question that we should be addressing. And then I think lastly, will also include technology.
If I could just pick up on that housing point. I think one of the things that's been exciting, even since the last time I got to hang out with you all and talk about these types of things, is that, there's an opportunity here that's an unexpected one. We know that because of COVID, many businesses, many of us are working from home, we're working in different environments, and we know that there's going to have to be some kind of shift, we suspect, about where people work relative to where they live. And instead of just seeing that as the crisis that it feels like right now, there's an opportunity to think about how do we rebuild coming out of that. So I think there are lots of places that we've made in this region just primarily job centers. And we will still have to figure out how to get people to those places, but there's an opportunity to think about infill development in those spaces, and building new housing in those places in ways that are obviously more attentive to our responsibility to the planet as we do so, and where the long-term benefits of that type of investment will absolutely be critical. But when we do so, we have to make sure that we make that housing so often we get that far, to Kyra's point, we get that far in our thinking, let's build that. And then we don't think about the economic justice aspects of it. So we have to fight for affordable housing in those places, or we have to fight for making sure that all the jobs that are built out in those places as we recover pay a living wage so that no one's living in poverty there. I think that's the kind of opportunity we have right now, to have that kind of discussion about what rebuilding looks like and how it can, it's sad, but a crisis can be an opportunity to really shake up what you're doing and not just fall back into the status quo. And we know how dangerous that status quo has been. So I think we have to be brave in this moment about what does building look like. I think we also have to recognize the investment in the parts of the economy that help sustain that lifestyle. So things that people may not think about, but like our investments in childcare. Nowhere has it been more obvious the importance of that. And when I think about how, not just me, but so many parents I know, part of their day-to-day life is figuring out, where can I live? Where can I work? Where can my kids get care? And how do I move between those places? I think there's an opportunity to think about those as part of a just recovery. The kinds of investments we make there that put childcare everywhere that we need it. And yet we're in the midst of just the opposite. We're seeing, even in this crisis, people talking about cutting budgets for schools, spacing them out further, making them more difficult to get to, making it more challenging, because that's what austerity thinking points to. And I think we have to invest in exactly those types of things that Sonja's talking about that really connect us back into a sustainable way of life, both environmentally, but socially and emotionally and economically as well.
Thank you. And Darwin, I think I saw you getting ready to speak.
Yeah, I would just add that also appreciate what Sonja said and Dr. Green just said. Also the thing of it's the background for that is an acknowledgement of how we got here in the first place. So things like with fossil fuels, it's important that really what makes the Green New Deal, the novelty for it is not just that we need to get out of that industry and go into others, but that the folks that are in there are working class folks. And that's part of the whole point then of just transition, that they're provided the right support so they can make transition into other industries. So in that sense, I'm less concerned necessarily about like what the final result will be the other industries, but just the acknowledgement, like, here's why we're stuck and how we got stuck. And also part of it is, again, the intersection of these intersectionality of these issues. It's the corporate power that's also kept us stuck in there, and literally the way they buy out politicians and get subsidized for their industries, and then literally creates pollution and disasters in primarily minority communities. So it's the importance connecting those dots and our ability to move forward, not just taking one little piece of it, but seeing how it's this larger web that really needs to be addressed in a holistic way.
And so then, Darwin, following up on that, what would your suggestion be for newly activated folks who want to do something meaningful to help answer the call for greater intersectionality?
And sure, and I'll let others add to it, but yeah, there's a whole lot of groups. I'll just say, not as an insider, but like as someone watching from the outside, I really appreciate like the Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal. And pushing against both political parties for substantial change. So wherever you can find a place to fit in, whether it's, with the work, my group, Racial Justice Coalition, NAACP, CPI, other groups, I think that's great. And again, even I think part of also the dominant trend now, especially, and I appreciate having Gen Z here, is the acknowledgement, understanding of the intersectionality, and they bring that to our organization, our groups, and that's the right kind of push, because that helps to get us out of our silo, and it helps to connect to other causes and other issues.
If it's okay if I add to that, yeah, definitely as a Gen Z individual, it's a lot of us feel activated right now. There's a lot going on, but we also feel overwhelmed. I know I do sometimes, and I don't have as much knowledge with local government and things like that. So it's more just kind of knowledge sharing and kind of building groups that you can work together with. So I would say for not students, but individuals of this generation and even other generations, I think the first step is to listen firstly. Make sure that you are listening to the BIPOC communities that are already doing this work, so that you're not overstepping, because most likely there will be people who are already doing the work that you're looking for. And I would say also, don't be afraid to go out there. If you find an organization, you're like, you know what, let me try it. Maybe you find something else and you can hop around, but there is the work that's already happening. So I would definitely encourage you to just try and see where that takes you.
Would anybody else like to take this question? If not, we'll start moving into Q&A.
I wanted to just elevate, we didn't touch on transportation as an industry that's key in recovery. And I wanted to elevate how important that is, but also how hopeful it is, because it is not a solution that's going to break the bank, especially if we're intentional. So for example, if we, there is a vision now by SANDAG that it looks at raising $177 billion to fund the massive transformation that our mass public transit system needs. But for an immediate solution, if we were to increase the number of buses in our region, it wouldn't require a lot of funding, and it would dramatically reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality. So the thing right here is that we are at the intersection of solutions that would actually provide dramatic improvements for our region if we're able to shift the agenda. And so I think that in terms of activation, it's realizing that, yes, we have opportunities for change, and that we actually need a lot of people to get behind this, because our policy, because we need to shift who's representing our communities, and that ensure that those decision makers are really advancing. And how are we checking the box of how do they know about the climate crisis? What is their record? behind the climate crisis? Do they understand environmental justice? And when I say, do they understand environmental justice, I'm not just saying a public relations agenda or platform, actual work. So for example, the Climate Action Plan for the City of San Diego presents itself as one of the most advanced in the country, but it hasn't done anything. And so we need to, our communities need to learn how to filter information so that we don't get confused, so that we could actually see the changes. And so I think it's really important to develop our critical thinking skills and be intentional about that so that we could advance our solutions. But in terms of activation, we need everyone on this.
Yeah, and it seems too that we, speaking more to like your points on transit, valuing and figuring out how to value, assess intrinsic value of environmental services is going to be really important now and moving forward. And there's a question that—
Hold on, I wanted to add something that I forgot, is that when we think of transportation, we think of something that riders need to pay for, but we need to start thinking of transportation as a social good. And it should be free. Really, it should be free. The transit system should be free because it's as important as having access to public education. And so if we're able to identify what are the social goods that we need at the basic so that we could have a real economic system in benefit of workers and the community that is actually creating and generating the money, then it would shift and dramatically improve our quality of life.
Yeah. And I know we want to switch to questions, but if I could just for a second, because that,
Absolutely.
what Kyra just said is so important to me about how we filter information though. Because I've seen so many people coming out, and as we talk about like transit adaptations and what we could do, for instance, people will be like, you can't do surge pricing for use of freeways because that's unfair and it puts a burden on poor people. And I'm like, great, I'm so glad you can see that. But what I don't understand is why you can't see that transit costs already, transportation costs, forcing poor people to have to own a car to get from one place to another is an economic burden that's unfairly there. So like that ability to take that analysis and apply it, not just to the things that are new, but the things that have already existed that have been a source of inequality and oppression.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, something to think about as you reply, Sonja, would be the only other question we have left from the group, which Kyra and Kyra have actually answered, is that whether or not you all agree that many of the problems will cost a lot more money to fix later than if we actually address them now. So go ahead.
Don't say that one more time. Maybe.
Whether or not, yeah, sure. Whether or not the problems that we're talking about now will actually cost more to fix later than if we just were to address the issue and the root of the issue now.
So I'm going to share my thoughts on this. And I love what Kyra said, critical thinking, right? Because we have to rethink, reimagine how we are addressing this. And I also want to kind of add on some of that conversation when we were talking about the budget, but how to address it. So I do believe that Darwin mentioned about skills and transition. And so when we went from like an agricultural industry as a society as a country, then we transitioned to an industry, right? And manufacturing. So I believe that investment in skills, training, reskilling programs for our future jobs or sustainable economy is required, right? Having a rapid recovery lens of even how you look at revenue and considering human capital. So when we talk about government, people always say it as though, to me, like it's just like brick and mortar, right? But government is people, right? People are making these decisions. So having that understanding and that mindset of human capital at the core of what we're doing. And as Kyra was saying about everyday people, right? I live, I work, I have childcare. So rethinking that operating model of accelerating our purpose, and our decisions are purpose driven for a better understanding of how we are living, how we are working, how are we working, living, and even doing extracurricular activities, right? So I do believe in adopting and adapting to our current ecosystem and what our future ecosystem looks like from a non-traditional collaborative, from a non-traditional way of a more collaborative community based way, I believe would definitely help us transition into that way. So when I look at these situations of what does our economic system should look like, and understanding it's the real world that we have to consider, the real world of our needs now, and what are we projecting for those real worlds later. So I kind of hope that kind of answer your question, or at least spark the conversation.
It does. Thank you so much. And with that, I think it's a brilliant point to leave off on, and to have everybody either go on to their other panels or wait for the weekend. But it's definitely started a lot of thought in my mind, and I hope everybody who's attended here has felt the same. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us as panelists this evening and sharing your expertise and your knowledge. And Adriana, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you again so much to Maddie and to all our panelists for joining us. It was a really great discussion. I enjoyed listening to it, so I learned a lot. So just a couple of ending notes. Like I said, thank you to everyone who joined, and thank you for the panelists who shared a lot of their wisdom. Just a quick reminder that PolitiFest continues tomorrow. If you like this discussion in particular, I highly recommend checking out our session about redistricting and what it means for our communities, which will be held tomorrow at 10 a.m. And I'm personally excited for it, so definitely check it out. You can find our full schedule on our event side, but if you get lost, just make sure to head back to politifest.org. And thanks again to everyone for joining, and make sure you hit us up on social media. So thank you. Have a good night, everyone.